If you want to move to Latin America, you will have to learn Spanish. Learning Spanish early and well is going to make the whole experience much more enjoyable, and also it's going to help you avoid a lot of problems and a lot of stress. So you should try to learn and actually learn it well as soon as possible. I'm going to give you some tips to learn Spanish fast, to learn to understand it, to learn to speak it fluently without wasting time. Because the most popular ways in which people try to learn Spanish or any other language are a complete waste of time. And your time is valuable and you don't want to waste it. The things you should avoid are very simple. You should avoid apps like Duolingo, which are basically Candy Crush disguised as language learning. It's a complete waste of time. You should avoid that. Don't ever use that app because it's a complete waste of your time. Number 2, traditional language classes and grammar books and all of that, which are very slow and very inefficient and very unnatural. And most people who go through those classes end up not speaking the language well, so you should avoid that as well. If you want proof, just look at all the people, probably including yourself, who took Spanish classes in high school or college for 2, 3, 4 years, sometimes more, and still not fluent. Not even conversational in most cases. So avoid that as well. Waste of time. Number 3 is learning with YouTube videos, comprehensible input, all that stuff. This is very popular among YouTubers. There's a lot of people promising you results with no effort, learn languages effortlessly, the lazy way, blah, blah, blah. Most of these people didn't learn this way. In fact, most of these people, especially the ones who are making videos in English without being a native speaker, had 5 to 10 years of English classes and then probably spent time abroad in an English-speaking country and have been using English for decades before making these videos. So no, they didn't learn English effortlessly watching YouTube videos. And you won't learn Spanish effortlessly watching YouTube videos either, because at most you can get to understanding Spanish pretty well if you watch insane amounts of hours of YouTube videos, but you will never speak well, because speaking and understanding are completely different skills. And by the way, even if you end up understanding the language well, it will be a very, very slow process. It will take you 10 times the hours to get to a level of comprehension in which you can understand native speakers by doing this than you could get to if you actually use your time efficiently. Again, your time is valuable. If you have goals, you've got things to do, you've got a business, anything like that, you need to use your time wisely. You can't invest 10 times more hours doing something to get the same results or even a worse result. It's just inefficient, right? So avoid those videos as well, all that stuff. It's good to have in the background after doing the proper learning, but it should always be a secondary thing, and it should always be a way to get some extra practice by having it in the background, not sitting down and watching, because that's a waste of time. But it should always be a secondary thing. It shouldn't be the main way to learn, because it's going to take you forever. And even then, you will not become fluent. And the last thing, going back to speaking, is trying to learn by only speaking. I hear this a lot. Just move to the country, just talk to people. The problem with this is that if you're an expat, and trust me, I work with expats. Most of my coaching clients are expats living in either the Mediterranean or Eastern Europe or Latin America, mostly Latin America. I meet a lot of people who've been expats in the same country for a decade or more, and they still are not fluent in the country, because the plan was to just learn by immersion. But the problem is, the total amount of speaking practice you get in a normal day is nothing. Let's say you move from the US to Colombia or Mexico, for example, but you still work online in English, because obviously you want a US salary. You don't want a Latin American salary, because you're smart. And you make way more money working online for a US company, or even having your own business but in English. That makes sense, right? But that's already most of your day. Most of a day in which all the hours we not sleeping, we spend them at work, most of us, at least the people who are productive members of society. So most of your day is already in English. And then you probably spend some time on social media. You hang out with other experts, probably, because that's the easy thing to do. Not blaming you, I've done that as well. Most people do it. Most of your entertainment is in English, so on and so forth. So the total amount of input you're getting in the language is relatively low compared to English, and that's input. And like I said, you can't become fluent with input alone. When it comes to actual speaking practice, if you start counting the amount of words you use during the day, the amount of sentences, even better than words, a better way to count how much you're using the language. The total amount of sentences you use in a normal day is probably less than 100, because you have what? Less than 5 interactions in Spanish. You order something in a restaurant, in a cafe, you have some very short and basic interaction with the cashier at the supermarket, things like that. Usually less than 5 interactions, less than 20 sentences each, less than 100 sentences a day of interaction. That's nothing. I'm going to show you how to 10x, 20x, 100x that if you are serious about learning Spanish and becoming fluent. So these are the problems. Using useless apps that are basically a complete waste of your time. Trying to learn with input by watching loads of videos, which is, again, a massive waste of time. You don't have thousands of hours to spend on YouTube. No productive member of society has thousands of hours to waste in front of YouTube videos, right? Classes, again, super slow. It will work if you do an intensive course. Let's say you take 6 weeks and you go to Spanish classes 4 hours a day, plus then you try to speak as much as possible in the street. Okay, then you will improve. But in most cases, you don't have the time for that. And if you just try to take some Spanish classes once in a while, like twice a week or 3 times a week, but it's just 1 hour each time or 1 hour and a half, it's going to take forever. Also inefficient. And the last thing, just talk to people and you learn. There are so many problems with this last approach. It's not only the very small exposure to the language, small amount of total practice you get, but there's also the fact that you use very limited vocab, you use the stuff that you've already learned for the most part, and you also don't get any feedback or barely get any feedback at all. Very little feedback. So keep making the same mistakes over and over again. This is how you get immigrants who've been in the same country for 20 or 30 years. I've seen this a lot in Germany, for example, or in Spain even. But they keep using very basic vocabulary, pronunciation's terrible. You get the idea. The speaking is bad after decades. You don't want to be that guy, all right? So these are the solutions. How do you learn a language? How do you learn Spanish or any other language efficiently? Well, there are 3 things you need to learn. 3 types of knowledge you need. You need vocabulary, you need grammar, and you need pronunciation. Both for understanding the language and for speaking it, you need all 3 things. Then you need to translate this knowledge into skill, and we'll talk about that later. First, how do I acquire the knowledge? Well, let's start with vocabulary, which is the most important thing, because if you don't know the words, it doesn't matter how much grammar you know, you simply won't be able to understand anything, and of course you won't be able to speak, right? So how do we learn as many words as possible, as fast as possible? And you do need to learn a lot of words to understand a language. Well, we're going to use 2 things. First thing is, and this is really important, mnemonic associations. This is an ancient technique that ancient Greeks and Romans were using already to memorize speeches that were hours and hours long, and they were using it to learn foreign languages as well as math formulas and things like that. Basically, you visualize and associate the vocabulary with the target language vocabulary, so you words in your language with the target language words. It's more than that to it, and it requires some practice to get good at, but it's definitely a good use of your time, because you can learn vocabulary 100 times faster if you do this. I literally learn hundreds of words a day doing this. You can memorize words and they stick. You can make them stick. You don't forget them by doing this, and this will make input way more comprehensible from the very beginning, and it will make speaking much easier as well. You need a lot of vocabulary, and mnemonics is the best way to memorize a lot of words fast. The other thing you need is mass sentences, and this will help with grammar as well. Mass sentences are basically, well, as the name suggests, a long list of sentences in which all the basic vocabulary and all the basic grammar is included. Spanish grammar is more complicated than English grammar, but it's not impossible to learn. The only thing you need to learn it without studying all the rules, without studying theory and all that nonsense, all the tenses and all of that, which is really boring and inefficient, The only thing you need to do is take a really long list of sentences in which all the grammar is included, not only the basic stuff, but even the advanced stuff if you want, plus all the important vocabulary, and you learn the whole list of sentences. You use the technique I explained earlier, the mnemonic associations, to learn all the words, and then you use translations, and you learn all the sentences by heart. You need, a couple thousand sentences maximum to learn all the grammar and most important vocabulary. And if you take this 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 sentences maybe, and you focus on learning these really, really well, you learn all the necessary vocabulary and grammar super fast if you do it right, instead of just watching random videos and things like that. Yeah, if you do it with the key words and the key grammar, just using a limited amount of text for it, text and audio, because you can also use audio for this. You can binge listen to it as well. More on that later. You will learn all the vocabulary and grammar you need super fast for Spanish or for any other language. Now, let's talk about pronunciation. It's the third ingredient of comprehension. Pronunciation is really important, and a lot of people just don't care about it or don't think it's important. They just prefer to ignore it because they're not comfortable with it. They know they don't sound good when they speak in the language, but they pretend it's not important because, well, a lot of people are like that. If you kind of insecure about things you're not all that competent at, you rather ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist. But in reality, if your pronunciation is really bad, well, first of all, people won't understand you or won't take you very seriously. You will always sound like Apu from The Simpsons, for example, like a caricature. You don't want that. You want to sound, and I know my English pronunciation is not 100% like a native speaker, but I think I'm 80, 90% there when it comes to sounding like a British person. You can get there with practice. But also, it's not only about sounding good when you speak, it's also about understanding. Because if you don't know how pronunciation works, you will not be able to understand native speakers. Even if you know all the grammar, all the words, you don't know what they sound like when a native speaker says them in fast speech, you will not understand them. You need to learn the pronunciation. And the best way to do this is, first of all, lots of listening. And just listening alone won't be enough, because especially if you haven't done everything that I talked about earlier, if you haven't memorized lots of words, the language will just be noise, right? You need to know the words, but then you need to listen to those words a lot in context to end up understanding them. You get good at listening comprehension, but doing a lot of listening. But that takes a lot of hours. And the main way you can speed up the process is shadowing practice, which is also really helpful to improve your speaking. Notice that every single one of these techniques I'm mentioning is good not just for one thing, but it works on several skills at the same time. This is because I only recommend the techniques that are extremely efficient. This is all about being time efficient, saving time, getting results as fast as possible, right? So, shadowing. What is shadowing? Shadowing is listening and repeating, but simultaneous. Instead of listening to a sentence, period, and then you repeat after, which would be fine as well, but shadowing is more effective. You listen to the same sentence 5 times in a row, and each time you speak alongside it. Yeah, you repeat the sentence, but together with it. So you, like when you sing a song, you try to sound exactly the same. Same tempo, same rhythm, same pronunciation, obviously paying attention to how each word is pronounced, but also the ups and downs and the natural tone of the language, all of that stuff. This will really help your own pronunciation for your speaking. It will also help with fluency because you're drilling thousands of sentences. Yes, thousands of sentences. You should do this with 1,000 sentences a day. Do this. Try just this. Drill 1,000 sentences every day for 30 days. Just do this for Spanish. Take 1,000 sentences and drill the whole thing. Listen and repeat. Shadow it once a day, the whole list, for 30 days. And you'll see how much your speaking improves in just 1 month. So, as we say in boxing, drillers make killers. What does this mean? If you drill the necessary techniques over and over again, the key techniques, you get really good at them. And then you do really well in live practice or in competition. The same applies to language learning. If you have your key sentences and you drill those sentences over and over again by shadowing them, you will get very good at saying those sentences very quickly. No hesitation, no thinking, no need to form the sentence thinking about the grammar, any of that. It's a sentence that you've said 100 times, or you've said similar sentences 100 times, so you just can say it whenever you need it. So this is the power of repetition with shadowing. So you need to do a lot of it. It's great for fluency and also for pronunciation. Your own pronunciation will improve and your knowledge of pronunciation will improve, so your comprehension also improves. In my experience, it's best to combine shadowing and then listening to podcasts with native speakers so that you're working on your sentences, you're repeating the same sentences over and over again, you're working on your pronunciation, and then you're testing your comprehension every day with real-life content. This is the best way to get really good at both understanding and speaking the language. Now, just shadowing will help you speak in complete sentences with mostly correct grammar, using the right vocab, so it will do a lot for your speaking accuracy as well. Yeah, you'll speak with very few mistakes. But if you want to make even fewer mistakes, you want to troubleshoot your Spanish and you want to make sure that you're almost perfect. There's no perfect, but you can be 99% there. You should do retrieval practice. What is retrieval practice? Retrieval practice is something that if you ask any actual scientist, not the social science people, like, social sciences, the linguists and all that, no. Actual neuroscientists like Huberman or Carl Newport, or the people who really know how to learn anything, not just a language, how the brain works. They will tell you that retrieval practice is the most effective way to learn vast amounts of information fast. I would add that combining it with mnemonics makes it even more effective, but retrieval practice is the scientifically proven most effective way to memorize information. And how does this work? Basically, you have to first review the information and then you have to retrieve it. You have to test yourself over and over again with instant feedback. What does this look like in the context of learning Spanish? You get your sentences in English and then you get the Spanish translation, and you hide the Spanish and you take the English sentences and you try to translate them, saying them aloud, from English into Spanish. And then you get the feedback, you get the right answer. And if you made a mistake, you repeat the sentence aloud correctly, and then you review it later. And then you do it with the next sentence, read it in English, try to say it in Spanish, get the feedback, you review it later, maybe tomorrow, maybe in a couple of days. And you do this with hundreds of sentences a day. This is very hard work. That's why most people avoid retrieval practice. But if you read Carl Newport's book, I don't remember the name of it, but it's something about straight A students, how to be a straight A student. He analyzed how a lot of straight A students memorize information. And the thing about them was that they didn't spend more time than average studying. The main thing about them was that they were doing retrieval practice. So it's not time consuming, it's time efficient, it's just very hard work. So most people avoid it. And they just instead review and read and things like that. But if you do this, you'll save a lot of time. And you'll get much better at thinking in Spanish, thinking of complete sentences, saying them correctly without having to think of how grammar works. And it will work. You will say the sentences correctly, right? And that's basically it. The last thing I would add is that all these exercises are extremely effective, but the main language learning technique that I recommend you combine all these exercises with is language islands. Language islands is a very simple concept that I learned from a book by a Russian linguist. And it's basically writing a list of all the normal interactions you have, all the common interactions, or even the future interactions you want to have, all the conversations, all the topics you want to talk about, and write absolutely everything you want to say. Yeah, so you choose your childhood and you write 100 lines about your childhood. Your work, and you write 100 lines about whatever you do for work, and so on and so forth. And you translate everything into the language you learn, Spanish in this case. And then you apply shadowing. You create an audio file and you listen and repeat those sentences over and over again. And you do retrieval practice with those sentences. Because if you do shadowing and retrieval practice and you memorize the vocabulary from random sentences, from mass sentences, it will already be really effective. But if you also do it with specific sentences you want for your own conversation topics, it'll be even more effective, and it will massively boost your ability to speak the language. The Spanish will get way better if you do this. So make a list of 50 to 100 topics, situations, conversations, etc., interactions. And for each one of them, write 20 to 30 lines, everything you want to say for that specific topic, that interaction. Translate everything and then apply the shadowing technique and retrieval practice. First, memorize the vocab with mnemonics. You do this, and in 100 hours, you will have learned Spanish better than most people after 3,000-4,000 hours of doing YouTube videos or apps or things like that. This is how you effectively learn Spanish without wasting time. And if you're watching this channel, you don't want to be wasting time. Most people I work with are entrepreneurs, professionals, people who are high achievers, not people who have time to waste, right? So you should be using your time effectively if you want to get real results.